you're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable, and you're going to make mistakes. I still make mistakes almost every single day. So I guess my best advice would be try not to make the really expensive mistakes. And the expensive mistakes, I would be in form of bad contracts, especially in the CPG business where you're dealing with wholesalers and distributors, where a lot of times they require these really crazy deals where you're basically signing off your life to them.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Fingerprints on Success. Today, we have an exciting guest with us, Steven DeAngelo. After spending 10 years as an interdealer broker in the capital markets, Steven took a bold leap in 2012 by founding a distillery in the Greenpoint section of Brooklyn. At the time, it was one of only 4 distilleries that had been founded in New York City in a century. His first brand, Greenhook Ginsmiths, quickly gained critical acclaim and became a staple in many of New York's finest bars and restaurants. But Steven didn't stop there. In 2017, he acquired and relaunched St. Agrestis, an Italian-inspired line of beverages. Their Phony Negroni, a non-alcoholic version of the classic Negroni, has skyrocketed in popularity and is one of the fastest-growing non-alcoholic beverages in the world. It even won the prestigious Platinum Medal and Best in Class at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. You will be inspired when you hear how Steven brought his vision to life, seizing opportunities, overcoming challenges, and pivoting and scaling his way to the top of the beverage industry. Let's unravel the fingerprints on success of Steven DeAngelo. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fingerprints on Success. I'm Bill Barrett, your host, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Steven DeAngelo. Steven, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Bill.
So, Steven, I think that your story is intriguing for all of our entrepreneurs because you had a nice, comfortable job working on Wall Street. And one day, and it's fun for me to tell our listeners, we've known each other a long time, and you came to me with a business plan. And you had this idea that you were going to launch a distillery. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And you left, and I said to myself, is he out of his mind? Like, he's got this unbelievable job. He's doing great. And he's gonna. What does he know about launching a distillery? So tell our listeners the story. How did you start this idea, and kind of walk us through your journey to like where you are now?
It's funny. You weren't the only person that thought that, and the truth is, I really didn't know much, and there was a lot of learning, on the go. And if I knew. If I had known then what I knew now, I might have never done it, which is really scary to think. But it's obviously been an everyday learning process. We launched the distillery back. I started building out the distillery actually like 2010, 2011, around there. Launched our first brand in February of 2012, which is Greenhook Ginsmiths. It's a line of artisanally produced gins. And we're coming up on, our 13-year anniversary this year. So, a lot has happened since then. When I first launched the distillery, back in 2012, even though there'd been a lot of like, the microbrewing, craze started in America started probably like around the 1990s. So there had been a lot of small breweries that had opened up in the US and even in New York, over that, previous 20 years, but there had only been, at the time that I had launched the distillery in 2012, I think we were like either the third or the fourth distillery that had opened up in New York since like Prohibition, which was like 1918. So,
which is incredible when you think about like New York City, all these businesses, all this space, millions of people, and, in a century, 4 distilleries.
Yeah, exactly. It's number one, opening up a distillery, it's very different from opening up a brewery. One of the reasons that the brewers had kind of an advantage against, I should say the microbrewers had an advantage against a lot of the big macro brewers like Budweiser and Coors, when they first launched in the 90s and early 2000s, is because, American beer had become very formulaic. I mean, it was you really couldn't tell much of a difference between a lot of the big American lagers. They're very neutral in flavor profile, and that it become kind of the American style lager had become, just very kind of plain,
Yeah.
So the microbrewers brought back a lot of like older styles and a lot of different styles from a lot of different parts of the world that had more or less become extinct. So they had an advantage in that respect. Whereas the big distilleries, not only in America but worldwide, were really producing very, very high quality products. So, to open up like a whiskey distillery, for example, in 2010 or 2015, and compete against distilleries like Heaven Hill and Brown-Forman, you were really up against it because those companies really produced a lot of great whiskey, and they had years and years of stock and stuff like that. Um, Not only that, from a quality standpoint, but opening up any business, let alone a distillery, which is a manufacturing business in New York, or New York City, even more specifically, has a really unique set of challenges because you're dealing with distilling is a highly regulated industry, from the federal level, from the state level, and then in New York, you also got a lot of local level restrictions from the fire department, the building department. So really, actually looking back at it, just getting the thing off the ground, just getting to the point where we had opened and sold our first bottle, which I guess it was probably like 2 years from the point I had, started giving
Wow.
up plans. Yeah, to the point we sold our first bottle. That was like a Herculean feat just in itself. And that's really what it had just begun.
Yeah. So tell our listeners too, because I think it's all right. You obviously came up with a formula, a recipe, trade secret for the initial products that you created, and I think it's kind of entrepreneurs love to hear when someone starts a business. How did you get it into the marketplace, right? How did you go from I got this idea, I'm going to learn how to make gin, I'm going to make a recipe, I'm going to build a distillery. Now I've done it. Now I'm actually filling bottles, right? How do I get those bottles into somebody's hand? How'd you
Yeah.
do it?
I was actually like looking back at it, I was tremendously unprepared from like a legal standpoint in terms of I shouldn't say legal standpoint, but just like no a knowledge standpoint about in alcohol, you have something called a three-tier system. And the three-tier system means that if you manufacture alcohol, you really can't just go out and sell it to a consumer or sell it to a liquor store, for example. By law, you have to go out and sell it to a wholesaler, like a distributor, and they can sell it to a liquor store, and the liquor store sells it to a consumer. And I wasn't really up to snuff on all these laws. I mean, there were so many things I was dealing with building out a factory and creating formulas and creating a brand, that I didn't really know that. But I was fortunate at the time that there had been some work done in the previous 3 years in New York State specifically, which allowed small producers to go out and actually have their own distribution license, which big distilleries were not allowed to do that. So I was fortunate that I was allowed to go out and sell my own product to retailers and restaurants and bars. So when you ask me the question of how did I actually go out and sell my first bottle, I put my sample bottle in a briefcase and I went out and I sold it. I mean, it was when I say like getting it off the ground in the first, forget about the first month, really in the first 5 years, it was literally shoe leather and concrete. I mean, it was a guy making the product, selling the product, even delivering the product myself in the first probably the first I think it was about 13 months that we were actually not only doing our own distribution and sales, but doing even our deliveries. So it was very much a vertically integrated process at the time.
Well, I know too. I remember you like on Sundays, right? You'd get the family together and go and bottle together at the factory. Like
Yeah.
literally have like recruit the family members to bottle gin.
Yeah, there's things you
Whatever you
never
had to do,
consider.
right?
Yeah, there's things you never consider. Like when you're, you got this, you think bottling would be the easiest part of it. Oh, you put it in a bottle, stick some labels on it, and that's it. But yeah, it's very intricate. The whole thing is very intricate, and it's a lot of, it's almost actually, which I didn't know when I was building out a business plan, which is only as good as, what you put on paper. The distilling business, and I should even say, the CPG business in general, particularly the beverage business, it's almost like two separate businesses you're running, especially if you're self-manufacturing. I mean, most guys who start a beverage brand go out to a co-packer to have the product produced for them, and then they market and sell the product. But I really wanted to manufacture the product as well. I really like the idea of manufacturing, and a manufacturing business and a beverage business, like the marketing side of the business, are two very different, very separate businesses. And in most cases, they really actually they don't get along too well. The manufacturing side, it's about making product and costs and overhead and all this and that. But going out and marketing and selling a product, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. No, was there a defining moment too when, and I think I recall that you got some headlines, like you were out there beating the pavement, literally, as you said, concrete and shoe leather and going places. And I can remember one of the first times I was in the Gramercy Tavern in New York, and I opened up the drink menu, and there's Greenhook Gin as a featured drink on the menu. And I remember being like texting you and being like, I'm drinking your gin at the Gramercy Tavern. Holy cow.
Yeah.
And it was, but was there like a defining moment when it kind of started to also blow up, where you got some coverage or kind of broke through?
Yeah, so we were really fortunate. In the, I was actually still working my previous career when the brand launched. I didn't feel like I had enough, proof of concept to be able to leave my job. I mean, it was putting food on the table. So I was still working in my previous career, financial markets up until we launched the product. I think the first bottle of Greenhook gin we sold was like February 19th of 2012. On March 3rd or 4th, 2012, the Wall Street Journal, which we did retain like a PR agency to send out bottles to some publications and things like that. And the Wall Street Journal, who's they're pretty tough critics, they wrote like a gloating review of Greenhook gin. It was an amazing review, and it was an immediate shot in the arm. We had emails and calls from all around the country and all around the world of, how do I get this gin, blah, 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 blah. So that really helped to kind of put us on the map. And that was actually where I felt like, all right, there's something here. And I put in my notice in my job, and I decided to just go all in on it.
Yeah. And, tell her, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so that was nice because I remember in the first couple of weeks I'm going around, and I had some immediate success. People who really trusted their palate. Not everybody trusts their own tastes. They were taking the product in, and mostly it was stores in the first couple of weeks. They loved the package and they liked the product, and they said, "Oh, this is kind of cool. This is from Brooklyn," and these were only stores. I was only going around to stores in Brooklyn at the time. But once we had that market validation from the Wall Street Journal, I was able to go around and start approaching, world-class restaurants and things like that. So it took time, but once we started to appear in restaurants and bars, that was really like the kind of discovery mechanism for consumers. That's really how it works really well like that in consumer products, where for example, you just mentioned you went to Gramercy Tavern. You would have never heard of Greenhook gin if you didn't know me. But you go to a place like Gramercy Tavern, you trust everything they serve you there because it's one of the best restaurants in the world. So you have a cocktail or maybe a gin and tonic made with this gin, and you saw the package. The bartender probably told you a little bit something about it because they're really kind of the gatekeepers in the industry. And then you drink it and you like it. And then all of a sudden you say, hey, where do I find this gin? And you find it in your local retail store, and you buy a bottle and you bring it home. So that's kind of how it starts working. It's like the push and pull. You can go around and sell into stores with a briefcase and a bottle. But if the consumer's not buying it, you're not doing yourself any good. You're definitely not doing the store any good. So I learned pretty quickly that selling it into the bars and restaurants proved to be kind of like almost like free advertising.
Yeah, and then tell me a little bit too, as the gin, vertical built up and was growing. Then you also kind of segued into additional products, and you launched the St. Agrestis brands, if you will. Tell our listeners a little bit about that, because I know like right now you've got a product that's just like literally blowing the doors off of things and people love it. But I think it's great to talk about for our entrepreneurs out there, kind of, you had your idea, your concept, your distillery, you're building it, but you kind of pivoted into other things as well.
Yeah, definitely. So gin was like in 2012, gin was it was a very much kind of a depressed category. There hadn't been much innovation in gin other than Hendrix, which had come out in the early 2000s. In America, people still actually don't drink a lot of gin. But I had an idea to create a gin that was kind of a different flavor profile that I thought would be a little bit more interesting and more approachable, if nothing else, to Americans. And we started really growing Greenhook, and over the first between 2012 and like 2016, it was growing really steadily. It was growing really well. But at the same time, as I said, we were like the third or fourth distillery to open up in New York. What happened was there was a big boom in distilleries opening up around the country, people like me. And one of the things about gin is that gin doesn't have to be aged extensively like whiskey does. So to put a whiskey on the market, it's got to age for a decent product of a minimum of 2 to 4 years. So that's what a lot of the distilleries realized was, in these 2 to 4 years, we really need to get cash flow going here, or else we're just going to die before our whiskey's even ready to go. So they all started releasing on
Making gin.
and gin was a big one. And what you had was a real flood to the market of gin, and a lot of not very good gins, to be quite frank with you. And gin is only about 4% of the US spirits market. So all of a sudden you went from having, 10, 15 gins on the shelf to having like 50 to 100 gins on the shelf. And that really creates a lot of consumer confusion. And it almost became kind of like, if you remember in like the late 90s, early 2000s, when there was a different flavored vodka every week coming out, blueberry flavored vodka, bacon flavored vodka.
I do.
Yeah, what eventually happened was they all disappeared, and you got streamlined down to Tito's and Smirnoff and Grey Goose, and that was it. So that kind of started happening with gin, especially because even though we were talking about this big gin boom that was happening around the world, in America there was a gin boom in production. There wasn't really a gin boom in consumption. But in 2016, I actually started hearing whispers about this local company that had opened up, and it was a local distillery, and they were two somms, two real high-end somms that had worked in the New York restaurant industry, and they had gone to Italy, and they had discovered something called Amaro, and Amaro is an Italian bitter. Basically, it's kind of a bittersweet liqueur that they drink after dinner in Italy. And they had kind of fell in love with these different regional Amari, and they decided they wanted to come back to New York and open up an Amaro distillery, which they did. And opening up any distillery is very tough. Opening up something super niche like Amaro in New York it's almost like an impossible feat. They did a really good job, but they were having a tough time, of course, understandably, and they were just basically, I heard whispers that they were just more or less going to shut it down. And I had seen this Amaro around, and the logo and the name, and the ideas kind of started turning of, I didn't really think that it had much upside as just a single, product at Amaro, but I had ideas. I thought the brand was really strong, that it could kind of integrate into a line of Italian-inspired spirits. I had this idea of doing initially a ready-to-drink Negroni, and Negroni is a really popular cocktail. Traditionally, it's made with Campari and vermouth and gin, and this was kind of before you're seeing a lot of now are ready-to-drink cocktails on the market. Most of them are in cans, but I had an idea to do a ready-to-drink Negroni cocktail, and a couple other ideas I had: a ready-to-drink spritz, and maybe some standalone spirits like the red bitter portion that went into the Negroni. So I thought, this could be a really cool standalone brand, but I didn't really have the bandwidth. I mean, I didn't really even have the capacity to do Greenhook on my own because, we didn't have a team at all or anything.
Sure.
So I approached one of my first employees who had worked for me at Greenhook. He had worked for Greenhook for, 8 or 9 months, and we did really well together, but, it's a tough job. So he decided actually to take a job with my distributor in New Jersey for Greenhook, and he started working for them for a while. And I approached him with this idea to maybe, buy this brand and expand the lineup. So he was, it took a little convincing, but, eventually I got him on board, and we bought the brand. I think it was around the summer of 2017. We purchased the brand from those two Psalms. At the time, all it was, they didn't even actually have a trademark registered for the Amaro, but, we bought the formula for the Amaro, and then we started developing all these recipes for these new products we were going to create. So we launched our first product that we launched out of the products we created for the brand ourselves was our ready to drink bottled Negroni, which we launched in the spring of 2018. And that followed with our standalone, what we call the Inferno Bitter, which is like our red bitter portion of that Negroni, which we launched probably about 6 months to a year after that. But then what happened was the pandemic hit. The brand was really growing strong, and Louis, who I alluded to, was, the guy I brought in as a partner in St. Agrestis. He was really the guy that was the face of the brand out there, pounding the pavement and, getting the sales going and everything. And he was doing a really great job. And then the pandemic hit, and that was, I remember it was like a Friday, I believe, and they said, this was like, whatever it was, March 15th, 2020, restaurants in New York are going to be closed for the next 2 weeks. And they said 2 weeks. We said, oh my God, 2 weeks, we're going to go out of business. And just the idea of being shut down for 2 weeks, thinking we're going to go out of business. We had no idea it was going to last for 3 years, that restaurants, were more or less going to be shut down. So, one thing led to the next. This was over like a 3-day period. We had kind of been following this COVID thing for a couple of months. We didn't really take it too seriously, to be honest with you, as most people didn't. And we actually were super fortunate in that we never stopped working. I mean, most people were home making sourdough breads, and they took like a 3-week vacation, and we were like, we're going out of business. We got to do something. And one of the things we had talked about was we're really well set up here. Like everybody's seeing the shelves empty in all the retail stores for paper towels, hydrogen peroxide and things like that, and hand sanitizer. We said, oh, wow, this is something we can actually really do. There's no hand sanitizer on the shelves. So New York had set in like an emergency law overnight, like on that March 15th, that local distilleries and local breweries were immediately given this basically the authority to be able to deliver direct to consumer in New York. So in other words, we could actually deliver to your door, direct to your doorstep, gin and Amaro and things like that we produced. So what we did was we actually, on all these little deliveries we were doing, a bottle of gin, a bottle of Amaro, we would give out a little sample bottle, one of our sample 50 ml bottles of hand sanitizer, which we were producing with our waste product of the liquor we were distilling.
Amazing.
And the press caught wind of it. It was like a big press, like it was like Huffington Post or something like that. And they did an article about it. And all of a sudden, we were getting phone calls from the Daily News, New York Daily News, New York Post, New York Times, and they wrote these articles about how these guys were producing hand sanitizer at this local distillery. And we were really, really like, I think the first distillery to be doing it. So immediately, once again, it was like 2012 with the press we had from the from the Wall Street Journal. We got calls from around the country from like major companies that would actually scare you if you knew they were calling us to buy hand sanitizer, like the Department of Homeland Security and the Post Office and major logistics companies like were calling us. Can we?
Right, and you're saying, holy cow! If they don't have it, like what's going right? That's that is scary.
So we were only producing it initially from our waste product, which was only so much of it, but we looked into it, and it was pretty easy for us to follow an FDA approved formula to produce this in scale. And that's what we started doing. It was like, I think it it was like 5 days after they had made that announcement. It was like March 20th. We basically converted our distillery into a hand sanitizer, um, factory for the next 8 weeks. And we gave a lot away to charity to some of the companies I was mentioning, but we sold a lot of it too. And over the next 8 weeks, we did something like it was probably literally 3 to 4 years of our annual revenue in 8 weeks, and that allowed us to really survive.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really allowed us to survive through the first year and 2 years of the pandemic. Um, but
By the way, I don't mean to interrupt you, but one of the
yeah,
things I've always found, having been a lawyer to entrepreneurs for, over 25 years, I know that story, obviously, knowing you, and I always use it as an incredible example of like how an entrepreneur has to know how to survive and has to know how to pivot and figure stuff out, right? And I always found that amazing because you had built these brands the way you did with high-end restaurants and high-end hotels and these high-end establishments that you had the retail consumer market, but you also had a lot of product, and then the world shuts down, and the way you guys pivoted and figured it out and went to hand sanitizer and then crushed it in hand sanitizer. To me, it's like the perfect illustration of like when entrepreneurs figure it out.
yeah, it's like it was a very scary time. And if we had literally, if we had taken off the 1 or 2 weeks that everybody took off, as I said, to hang out at home and take a little vacation, we wouldn't have done well, because within 2 weeks after we started doing it, every distillery in the country was doing it, and not just distilleries, but different companies as well. So, we hit it really hard. We worked around the clock, literally 24 hours a day for like 8 weeks. And then the supply really caught up. So the shelves were stocked. There was no more demand for it within 8 weeks. Um, so we're sitting around at that point, and you couldn't go out and see our customers the way we used to pound the pavement, because nobody would even let you in their place. Everybody was wearing masks, if you remember, and all this and that. The
Sure.
restaurants were closed. So we're sitting there, and right before the pandemic had started, it was actually October, November of 2019. Louis Catazon had gone to the Bar Convent Berlin. That's one of the biggest like bar liquor shows in the world. And when he came back, he was giving me sort of his assessment of the event and, what happened. And he goes, to be honest with you, the biggest thing over there, what's happening in Europe right now, is like non-alcohol. I said, non-alcohol. He says, yeah, like alcohol alternatives, like non-alcohol distilled spirits, like they're really big over there into like moderation of alcohol. I said, that's funny. It's strange, you know. So started thinking about it. And about a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, I went back to him. I said, what do you think about us making a non-alcoholic version of our Negroni, our bottled Negroni? We'll call it the Phony Negroni. And he goes, that's an incredible idea. And, we put it on the shelf. We didn't really think much of it because we were busy at the time in October, November 2019. The world hadn't shut down yet. But fast forward to June of 2020, and we're sitting there fiddling our thumbs, can't go out and see anybody. So I said, I'm going to start R&D in this thing. I started working on the formula to create the Phony Negroni, and this was in like June of 2020. It took a while to really nail the formula to create this product, producing a non-alcoholic product that, tastes like alcohol.
Yeah.
It was very difficult. And we finally launched it in January 11th of 2022. And it really changed the business overnight. I mean, this is the product right here, if you haven't seen the bottle. It really changed the product overnight. So we went from being, kind of a local brand that was people really liked, a high quality producer, into one of the fastest growing non-alcoholic beverage brands in the world right now. So it's going really well. It really changed the business overnight.
And like a lot of things too, the quality of the product is a big part, maybe the biggest part of the success. And not that this is a shameless plug for you, but just in the spirit of total honesty, I'm a big Negroni guy. I really enjoy Negroni. It's like one of my favorite beverages, and I just remember being blown away the first time I tried the Phony Negroni, and was like, if you would put the real thing and the Phony Negroni next to each other. And as someone who enjoys that drink a lot, I mean, I thought I was drinking an alcoholic beverage, even though you're not. I mean, it's really,
Thank you.
it's a great product and pretty incredible.
Thanks.
And
It's gotten
again,
a lot of
another
award.
pivot,
Yeah.
right? Another massive pivot, which is you're a distillery, you're in the alcohol business, you survive, COVID by pivoting and always being aware of what's happening in your markets and what's happening in general, and going to events and seeing what's happening in the world, and then pivoting again in the beverage category, but to something different, and having that kind of success as one of the most rapidly growing brands in the world is just really remarkable. So I think it's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so I want to pivot a little bit on you. So we talked about you pivoting. Now I'm going to pivot because I want to talk a little bit about philosophies, right?
Mm.
I want to talk a little bit about you know, now that people have a real great sense of your entrepreneurial journey and what you've done and the success and kind of how you made that trip along the way. Tell me a little bit about if you reflect on the success you've had over the years, is there like a particular mindset or way of thinking or kind of like philosophy that you've had that when you look back, you say, it's because of that way of thinking or behaving that maybe attributes to is a huge contributing factor to why I'm so successful today?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a salesman. I think it's really important for anybody who's an entrepreneur to be able to sell their own product, not be scared to. It's tough. I mean, it's hard to get out there and pull on locked doors, and a lot of people probably think it's beneath them to go talk to to try to sell. You're literally hand selling your product into a store, but it has to be done. It's the only way to get a product on the market. So I think, coming from a sales background, I mean, I wasn't a pure salesman when I worked in the financial markets, but anybody who works in the financial markets has a sales background. So being a salesman, first and foremost, is, I think, kind of like in the company ethos. Like, you always have to be selling. You got to be a revenue producer. But I think one of the things that's kind of allowed us to keep our longevity, as far as being in business for, 12, 13 years in a really tough business where in the first couple of years, we weren't doing well as a business, obviously. And even in the middle, even after we had established ourselves for the 3 years and it turned profitable, it was always really, really, really close. So, I was partners when we first launched the brand. As my brother was my business partner, and he was the only investor other than myself in the company. And I think one of the things that I learned from my brother, and even though we had a contentious relationship as business partners, as he's like the pure small businessman. And I think having a small business mentality is really important. And I think my brother did a good job of ingraining that in me because, prior to like 2021, 2022, there was a lot of free and cheap money out there. If you wanted to go out and
Yeah.
raise $5-10 million, if you raised $10 million and launched the product and got it to $3 million in sales, everybody who invested in you thought that was a big win. But that changed drastically over the last few years. Now you actually, in order to get investment, in order to be a successful company, you actually have to run a successful business. You got to be profitable. And that has just recently happened, really, the last 2 or 3 years. So I think having that small business mentality ingrained in me, as far as being cash flow responsible and not wasting money on anything, even if you're talking about giving product donation to a local art event,
Sure.
I think you have to really watch every dollar you spend.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs share that view. I mean, even, for me running a law firm, we run it like a small business, even though it's not, right? It's 225 employees, but you know you got to look at all the invoices and sign the checks and really make a lot of decisions in order to be a profitable business, and you can't get too carried away with yourself and I always said, like, I'd see these organizations where they've got a box at Yankee Stadium and they've got, a box at Madison Square Garden, and they're spending money on all these big events. And then at the end of the year, they don't have a lot of profits to distribute. So,
Waste, abuse, and fraud. I mean, it's those three things: waste, abuse, and fraud. I actually, um, there's people around me who think I'm crazy and it's a waste of my time and I shouldn't be doing it. But every single month I go through the ledger. I do the ledger myself. I go through every bank account we have, every credit card we have, and I go through every single transaction that we've done. And every single month I find something that's either a fraud or a dupe. We live in the age of fraud where, somebody's ringing up your credit card that's not you, or somebody's charging you a duplicate charge. And it's not necessarily nefarious, but it happens every single month. I'll find something that's like a $500 to $1,000 dispute.
yeah, and I think that every entrepreneur would agree with you that one guy I remember telling him, he always used to say, hey, look, if you're careful and watch all the pennies, the dollars some have a way of lining up. And also your comment about, being able to sell your product or your service, 100%, I think entrepreneurs out there would understand and agree with that. And I've often found, like, there's been a lot of entrepreneurs I've represented over the years. In fact, I'm working on a book right now talking about all these types of things in entrepreneurship. But a lot of times they are the best salesperson of their product or their service, and some of them are great at running a business too. Others are not so great at running a business, and maybe put leadership teams in place to actually do the running of the business part, and kind of realize their unique ability is the fact that they're the absolute best salesperson for their product or their service, and they spend their time building out the sales of the company while other people are running the day-to-day. You're unique in the sense that you're good at both and been successful at both. But without a doubt, if you can't sell your own product or service, you're going to probably have a hard time being an entrepreneur, being a successful one at least.
Definitely. One of the things that I think has really helped in scaling, we've really scaled the Phony Negroni over the last, it's going on 3 years now, 2 or 3 years. But one of the things that we finally did this year is Louis's brother, Matt, we made him a partner, I don't know, maybe a year, 2 years ago. He was originally working for us in California as our sales guy back in like 2018, 2019. And then when the pandemic happened, he came back to New York. So when we first launched the Phony Negroni, everybody was kind of wearing a lot of hats. We were running around the city, calling on different accounts and this and that. And once we grew to a point, it kind of became unsustainable. It became disorganized. So we've kind of divided and conquered over the last year. And Louis now is handling like the wholesale side of things, dealing with the distributors. Matt has kind of took the flag for the DTC side of the business. And that's a part of our business, which has become like almost 40% of our business, the direct to consumer e-commerce channel. And he's done an amazing job at that. And that's something I'm completely illiterate with. So that's something I never could have done on my own. And I've actually been mostly, concentrating for the last year on production, overseeing the production, of course, operations and overseeing the whole business. But really, it's super important that somebody's overseeing production, because if you have one product recall, you're out of business. If one thing happens bad with the product, you're out of business.
Yeah, no, yeah, without a doubt, right? And I remember I had a client in the supplement space years ago that ran into some problems with having a recall on their supplements, and like they were in GNC, they were in all sorts of places, and immediately once GNC knows they have a product that then gets a recall, they're like, they're out. And it's like a trickle effect. So I asked you about positive mindsets and about philosophies that contributed to success. Let me flip that around on you a little bit and say, now when you reflect back on the journey and it's been so successful, what are maybe, an example or two of things that if you were advising, Steven 10 or 12 years ago, as Steven today, what would you tell yourself that maybe are things that you wouldn't do again or that you would do differently?
Yeah. So one thing I probably learned in the first 2 years of business is you're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable, and you're going to make mistakes. I still make mistakes almost every single day. So I guess my best advice would be try not to make the really expensive mistakes. And the expensive mistakes, would be in form of bad contracts, especially in the CPG business where you're dealing with wholesalers and distributors, where a lot of times they require these really crazy deals where you're basically signing off your life to them. So I would be really careful about contracts and not making expensive mistakes on that end, not making expensive mistakes in form of recalls and problems like that. Or even minor things like leases, for example. When I first signed my lease back in 2010, I didn't even know much about the zoning requirements of New York in terms of running a distillery. Something like if I had signed a lease in a place that didn't have something like a sprinkler system, it can cost you $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 to install a sprinkler system. So things like that would be a major mistake and a major blow to a startup business.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about mentors.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've always seen over the years, whether it's, it could be any type of person in your life at all, but usually entrepreneurs will always tell stories about people or a person in their life where when they think back on their success, they'll say, I'm not quite sure that I'd be where I am today, or things would have gone as well as they've gone if this person hadn't made an impact in my life or given me the right direction or the right guidance. Any people like that in your background that you'd like to tell a little story about?
Well, I didn't come up obviously in the beverage business. I started off in the financial markets. So I did a lot of learning on the go, of course, but I try to learn things from every conversation I have with every single person. I've learned a lot from you, and I don't want this to sound like brown nosing to your audience here, but I learned a lot. I've learned a lot from you. You've always, whenever we've been at holidays or whatever, we've had conversations. I always pick small things about entrepreneurs you've dealt with. I've learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from my brother, as I mentioned, in regards to small business. And like I said, didn't always agree with my brother. We had a contentious relationship, but you learn. He's a good small businessman. I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from a guy named Michael Judge, who I actually worked with in my previous career in the financial markets. I worked on the same trading desk as him. He was actually one of the first guys with me with Greenhook. He started with me in March, so he's been with me along the whole journey as a kind of the head sales guy. He's the consummate sales guy. He never gets frustrated. Like, I'm a good sales guy. Louis is a good sales guy. We get frustrated. You're dealing with rejection all the time. You're talking about a low. This isn't baseball where you're 3 for 10, you go to the Hall of Fame. You might be 3 for 100, you go to the Hall of Fame in this business. Michael Judge, he's an old Brit. He's 75 probably at this point. Never gets frustrated. He's always writing the emails, thanking people, doing the calls. Still pulling on locked doors. So it's very inspiring to see somebody like that who's a consummate salesperson. And actually, in my old company that I worked for, my uncle was my boss, my Uncle Ross, and he
Oh, really?
Yeah, he sat me down when I first kind of graduated from the board, and the board is literally you write prices on a whiteboard, and they're screaming prices at you, in real time. The reason it was on a whiteboard at the time was actually it was too fast of a market to be done on a computer. So they would just shout the prices out, and you got to be able to decipher what 20 different people are saying at the same time and write this. Yeah, so it teaches you to train your ear. And when I first sat down on the desk as a broker, my Uncle Ross sat me down next to this old seasoned curmudgeon-y broker by the name of Frankie Gaggs, who you've probably heard the name before.
Yeah.
He listened in on one of my first phone calls, and he wanted to listen in on what I was saying to this customer. And he goes, hang on. And he had a really funny voice. He goes, that was a shit call. I said, very tough. You didn't get anything out of that guy. You got nothing out of him. You wasted his time. You wasted your time. Never get on a phone call and never get off a phone call without getting something out of them, without getting some information as to what they're doing, what they're interested in, what they're thinking, a price, something. Never waste their time, never waste your time. And that was an important thing to learn because, we're in a day and age where everybody wants to do these Zoom calls, and don't waste your time. Get something, learn something, get something out of it.
Yeah. Well, boy, that was actually probably more brilliant advice than maybe even realized at the time, right? Because
Yeah,
how that
absolutely.
applies everywhere.
I think about that comment a lot, like, on phone calls and stuff.
And time is the most precious commodity that everybody has and everybody values.
I mean, I have a brand, Phony Negroni lives on a retail shop, but you, as a lawyer, you are your brand. So, and your time is very, very limited. So I think it's even more important for somebody in the service industry to think about that.
Yep, for sure. Well, let me ask you this. You know, how do you, when you think about, you had a lot of people, you gave a bunch of examples of people that really had a positive impact on you that you learned a lot from over the years. What do you try to do to pay it forward? What's your, how do you try to kind of help the people that are trying to make their way up the ladder in business?
Well, I'm obviously talking a lot today, which is actually a little out of my character, but you make me feel comfortable. I've actually, the older I get, the more I just try to listen. We were doing like interviews, a lot of interviews this week. We've been trying to hire a salesperson in Texas, and we've been doing that process with Louis and Matt, and actually our Colorado market manager, this great guy by the name of Randy Lehman, and we've been interviewing candidates because he's going to ultimately manage this person in Texas. And I've really just been listening and letting them kind of run the process, because a lot of times I feel like as I get older, I learn more listening than by trying to, trying to be the person in charge of the flow of the conversation. Listening and I guess I try to, Louis and Matt are younger than me, 10, 15 years younger than me. So try to, get across the fact that you do have to think about the big picture. In a lot of times, like in my previous career and in any service business, you always want your salary to be growing, year after year. And that's kind of how we measure success, unfortunately, a lot of times in America. But it doesn't work like that in business a lot of times. You're going to have your up years, your huge years, your really bad years, your down years. So I think ultimately, trying to let them realize it is about the big picture is something I've tried to reinforce.
I think that's great advice. All businesses are different, but I can really relate to what you're saying, because I know that sometimes you have great years, sometimes you have good years, sometimes not as good. Different things happen. I can remember, working my way up the ladder year after year, and then the crash of '08 hit, the Great Recession, and all of a sudden, for the first time, instead of my income going up, it went down by like 40%. And I remember being like, oh, like, I had little kids, a baby, and being like, oh my God. And, and you get through it. And then you grow, and it's not always going to be perfect. And I think that that is really great advice for any entrepreneur, especially younger entrepreneurs, because you're right. People measure, or they think that you measure everything, that it has to be, if you're doing well, it's got to be a constant trajectory. It also doesn't take into consideration investment, right? That you might feel like you're doing well, but maybe you're not going to realize as much money that you hoped, because you have to reinvest in your business, and and it's kind of like an ongoing cycle. So that's really interesting that you give that guidance. Let me ask you, what's like a topic right now, or like kind of, I don't want to call it a current event, but like something that's kind of hot topic on your mind that you think that you've been thinking a lot about, or maybe you think people should be thinking a lot about, just in the world of business and entrepreneurship, or just the world in general. Like what have you been thinking about a lot lately?
Well, in my specific space, I think that the non-alcohol thing is obviously super interesting. The question becomes like, the younger people and people in general are drinking a lot less alcohol now. 81, believe it or not, I think something like 81% of the consumers who drink this product, the Phony Negroni, drink alcohol. but they drink it on days when they're not drinking alcohol, or they'll pepper it in on a day where they, like a Sunday, for example, where they might be drinking some drinks, but they want to, they want to hang out and enjoy the day, but they don't want to drink 8 drinks. So they might drink 2 or 3 cocktails, a couple of these just to extend their drinking. But one of the things that I've actually been hearing is that, there's some experts and really smart people in the business who think that in 20 years, drinking alcohol might be as taboo as today smoking cigarettes is. I don't know if I agree that it's going to be that extreme. I don't think it'll happen over 20 years, but that's something I've obviously thought about. But beyond that, I mean, outside of my space, things that I'm concerned about and always thinking about that I think will really affect the world and business in general is, of course, climate change. And I don't think that's a political issue.
Right.
Human rights issue, but I think it's undeniable if you see what's going on around us. And that's really going to affect, I mean, you see the damage that's going on down in Florida and everything, and the cost of everything. It's going to really change the way we live our life, the way we run our businesses. So I think that's probably something entrepreneurs really need to think about, not just in the products they create, but how they run their businesses and where their businesses are located and everything that goes along with that, insurances.
Yeah, that's a huge fact that, people that are entrepreneurs have to think about, right? The whole issue of climate change, like in terms of, like you said, like where are you locating a business? Where are your customers located? What type of business? What are the insurance rates going to be? How's that going to change? Absolutely.
Look at the wine business. The wine business is a farming business. It's a farming business. And, imagine me a grape grower in California right now with the wildfires and everything else that goes. I mean, I think it's probably it's like the defining issue that the next several generations are going to have to face. So yeah, I think that's probably the big one. I think hopefully the nuclear thing can get solved, and the wars and all that can get solved through diplomacy, but the climate change thing is a much bigger issue.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I always love kind of my final question to finish with, which is I ask people about kind of their why statement. When you kind of look at this journey, it's been incredibly successful. You made a big impact. You continue to do so. You continue to grow and innovate. Like what was the why behind all this, right? You had this great job, right? You're doing well, and you had a vision to start something. What's drove you to do that, and what drives you to keep going and keep innovating? Because it's not just money. Everyone likes to make money. That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
no,
awesome. But
I make less money now than I did in my previous career. I've had my good years and everything, but on a daily basis. I mean, this whole idea actually came out of exactly what you were alluding to before, the 2008 crash. And I was actually in my late 20s at the time. I was 28 when Lehman Brothers went out. And overnight, just like you, I was making probably 40 or 50% of what I had been making prior to that in my late 20s. And what I had realized is I never really liked my job that much at the time. I liked the money. And waking up in the morning and not wanting to go to work, it's a bad feeling, So when I started, forming this business plan and the idea of working for myself and being in charge of my own destiny, which was one of the reasons I was so interested in manufacturing my own product, is I don't like relying on other people. I like relying on Steven DeAngelo. So that's kind of what it was born out of. And then what has kept me going, day after day after that is, as I said before, the only initial investors in my company were me and my brother. So my only way out of this whole thing was in a pine box. You know what I mean? So that's really what had kept me going initially. But now, the real drive is with the Phony Negroni particularly, creating something that outlives me. I want this to be the #1 non-alcoholic adult beverage on the market, and I want it to outlive me.
it's awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to end our conversation today. Steven, I really want to thank you for coming on the program, for being on Fingerprints on Success. I think our entrepreneurial audience out there around the world is going to love hearing your story and learning about your journey and this incredible business and products that you've built and continue to build. So thanks again for coming on. It was great having you.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.